All right, thank you, Mark. Can you all hear me? Is that picking up at all? Maybe, sort of. There, is that better? All right. So, as Mark said, I'm the extension entomologist here. This time of year in field crops and vegetable crops, I'm focused most heavily on corn earworm management. We started picking up an increase in our earworm trap counts about 10 days ago. We're catching between 20 and 30 moths a night in most of our traps. I'll let y'all pass that around. Those are male love-struck earworms that we use as an indicator of what the population is. About 10 days ago, we went from catching an average of 1 to 2 a night to catching anywhere from 20 to 90 a night, depending on where that trap is. We've got traps that are right next to silking sweet corn. We've got traps that are near corn, and we've got a dozen locations spread across the state. So in sweet corn, what I've been doing the last several years has been looking at how to improve our earworm management efficacy and efficiency, because our most recent mode of action on sweet corn was besiege, which has chlorantraniliprole in it, and that's about 15 years old. We've got pyrethroids that have been around since the 70s, and we have pyrethroid resistance in our moth population. We test moths for resistance starting in late May, early June, continuing on throughout the season. Typically, we see a fairly low level of resistance early in the season, but by mid to late July that builds up so that we're only killing about 60% of our moths later on in the season. That does not mean that you will not have worm efficacy out of pyrethroids in field crops, but it means that there's good potential that you're not going to get great efficacy. I shared some of these graphs a couple years ago at Ag Week. I'm just going to pass this out. Thanks, Tom. In soybeans, when we're worried about earworm management, we're worried about beans that are currently flowering, because those moths are flying into flowering soybeans to bulk up, feed on nectar at night, and they will start laying eggs on those flowering soybeans. So that's going to be your barley beans or some of your earlier planted double crop soybeans. And then from here on out, just the double crops in general. I have killed earworms with Warrior in soybeans before, but it's inconsistent. I've also had other spray trials in sorghum where Warrior gave me about 40 to 60% efficacy. There's a great tool on North Carolina State University's website called the Corn Earworm Threshold Calculator. You can enter in your cost of control, so your application cost, product, and then how much it's going to cost to get a sprayer on that field. You can enter in your row spacing and the approximate value of those soybeans, and it will return an earworm threshold. Now those graphs were made after the 2019 season, so the numbers are a little bit, they need to be updated. But I just want to make you aware of that tool. So in 2019 here on the research station, we had a large earworm population blow up in a field on the other side of the wood line, and I dropped a spray trial on it. Our population was such that we were at what the threshold calculator at the time with $8 soybeans calculated for a besiege application. So that's the top gray bar. The bottom bar is what a pyrethroid threshold would be, assuming good efficacy. In my sorghum trial, we only killed about 60% of the worms with Warrior and about 75% of the worms with Pyrethroid and Besiege and Lanate and Carbaryl. So looking at our soybean worm population, if we had gone out with a Warrior spray and only gotten 60% control, that would have only reduced those worms to a point where we're still above threshold. So the bottom line on that one is take a look at that calculator and start choosing and thinking about your products carefully if you go much above an earworm threshold. In sweet corn, we've got fewer tools. We've got Besiege, we've got Elevest. They're for the most part identical. They're chlorantroniloprol and bifenthrin for Elevest or Warrior for Besiege. We've got our Pyrethroids, and we've got our spinosins, Intrepid Edge and Radiant. The spinosins by themselves do not give us great earworm control in sweet corn, maybe about 40% clean ears, against an untreated check of around 5 to 10%. When mixed with Warrior, we get very good control out of those products. They're expensive. I do that because I want to know if we can take lanate out of the system because it's got a pretty high toxicity and hazard for applicators. But among the pyrethroids, there are efficacy differences, and they've been consistent for me over the last 4 years. So in this trial behind, we've got Warrior at its high rate, we've got Hero at a mid rate, Hero at a high rate, Pyrethroid, and Brigade. This will get sprayed every 3 days for a total of 6, maybe 7 applications before we harvest it in about 2 weeks. It's gotten its second application. It'll get its third application Friday. Consistently, Hero has provided the best efficacy, but that's at its high rate at 10 ounces. That's an expensive product, and I have heard from other consultants that you can make Hero with generics and it'll be a little cheaper. Pyrethroid XL at 2.8 fluid ounces has also consistently outperformed Warrior for me, and by quite a bit. So I think we can squeeze a little bit more efficiency out of our earworm sprays if we, depending on the material that we use. I've got another handout here. If any of y'all are growing sweet corn, I put this together a couple of seasons ago, so I need to update it. There's about 10 copies there. If anyone wants more copies, feel free to come up to me later on. We use those pheromone traps to time our sprays. This time of year and with a high moth activity and hot weather, we tighten up our spray intervals by a day. That's a very conservative tightening. So we're applying in this trial every 3 days. I recommend to folks to consider a 2 to 3 day spray timing, depending on the moth counts. 3 days following a Besiege or an Elevest, and 2 days following a Warrior. The other pyrethroids that have better efficacy, I err on the side of a 2 day spray interval in hot weather for those. I think that's very conservative, and if something happens, a sprayer breaks down or a thunderstorm decides to sit on a farm and you can't get that application out, I think the farmer will be okay. Where it's most important is when we have green silks like these. Those are the most attractive silks for female moths to be laying eggs in. Once those silks start turning brown, the moths are looking for greener pasture, so to speak. So the tighter spray interval is probably the most important in the first 10 days of that silking period. Afterwards, if we start kind of backing off a little bit, I think we'll be fine. Our chemistry is really old, but there's still a lot of questions in terms of practical management and fine-tuning how we approach a spray program, which makes sweet corn really fun. It's also very rewarding. When we evaluate these trials, we'll harvest 100 ears out of each treatment. What do you think we do with all of that sweet corn? It's good stuff. I settled on this variety. This variety has just been fantastic for me. I am a sweet corn snob when it comes to flavor. So I'm really happy with this. We've got, right next to me is BT sweet corn. We've got a non-BT Obsession. We've got our Performance series, Obsession 2. We've got our non-BT, let's see, what is that one? Is that Providence? Yes. Providence. We've got, and that's an isoline for attribute 2 and attribute 1. Attribute 1 is BCO805, and attribute 2 in this trial is Remedy. The attribute 2 BT sweet corns have a Viptera gene in them that is still lights out on sweet corn or corn earworm. You do not need to spray attribute 2 or attribute plus sweet corn for earworms. You may still need to spray it for sap beetles, 1 or 2 applications at brown silk. You may still need to spray it for stink bugs, but you won't have to spray it for earworms. That is not the case with any of the other BTs. Attribute 1 or Performance Series sweet corn will still get a lot of worms in them. The best thing, in my opinion, to do with those sweet corns is to treat them the same as a non-BT sweet corn. The Performance Series sweet corn, you'll get smaller worms when you're harvesting it, but if your customers don't want to see any worms in the tip of an ear, it's kind of out the window. Then next to that, we've got a larger block of sweet corn that we're going to be spraying in about a week and a half. That'll be 12 treatments. So we'll have, again, all the pyrethroids by themselves, different rates. We'll have different spray programs with Besiege and Elevest mixing in there. And this year I'm going to be looking at Intrepid Edge and Radiant at low rates, tank mixed with pyrethroids. These trials do go above label restrictions, but that's because I want to know where the weakest component is in a spray program. So I'm going to apply all of these products by themselves for the full 6 applications. Read your Besiege and Elevest labels carefully, especially if you have to make multiple applications, because there are active ingredient restrictions on those. The other pests that we've started picking up in soybeans this year are green stink bugs and brown stink bugs. We had a really large we had a really large stink bug flight in our blacklight traps that we use to monitor for earworms in June. So on our website, we have our stink bug and our earworm trap counts. So if you look at UD insect trapping program, that'll take you to the link where we keep all of our trapping data. So we started seeing green stink bugs show up in R2 soybeans and R1 soybeans. They do not cause yield issues in early R stage soybeans, but they're not going to move out of those soybeans either. R4, R5 is the most susceptible to yield loss from stink bugs. So you got a window of time. You know they're there, but you've got a window of time before you have to manage those. Our threshold is 5 stink bugs and 15 sweeps. I suspect for plenished soybeans that have a little bit higher value, and some folks say they take longer to dry down. I suspect that threshold should be a little bit lower for plenished soybeans, probably around the 4 and 15 sweep range. We've had fields exceed that this year already. Green stink bugs are in their 4th, 5th instar right now. We're going to have a new generation coming out here real soon. Those tend to pile up in double crop soybeans, so be monitoring for them. Green stink bugs are fairly easy to control with pyrethroids. Brown stink bugs are a pain in the butt to kill with a pyrethroid. So pay attention to what stink bug species you have in the field. One more thing I want to say about sweet corn is, especially this time of year when we're putting out between 4 and 6 applications, most of that is very heavily pyrethroid focused. You may want to take a look at those plants right around green to brown silk to make sure you're not building up an aphid population. We just dropped a spray trial on sweet corn this morning that was covered in aphids, and the aphids were covering the ears, and the honeydew was making those ears really slick and sticky. Our best aphid products have a 7-day pre-harvest interval, and they do not control earworm. So you want to make sure. It's also a very sporadic problem. It doesn't happen every year, it doesn't happen every field, but aphids are a created problem. So be aware of that. We are seeing a lot of corn leaf aphid pressure in some spots this year. Again, if y'all are growing sweet corn, I had a call a couple weeks ago of a fella who had bird chariot aphids in his field corn. He wanted to control them because he wanted to enter that corn into a trial contest. Typically, it's not a major issue in field corn this late. Does anyone else have questions about insect pest management in soybeans or corn? Yay? Nay? Clear as mud? If you do not subscribe to the weekly crop update, please do so, because I will regurgitate this information much more articulately sometimes in there. I also really need to thank my lab crew. This year I have 7 people working for me. They're doing a fantastic job. My technician, Morgan Malone, keeps them all organized for me. And one of them is currently killing lots and lots and lots of earworms in vial testing right now. Our vial tests use cypermethrin as the active ingredient, which is a proxy for pyrethroids in general. We are tweaking those vial tests to look at beta-cyfluthrin, lambda-cyhalothrin, and bifenthrin by themselves. So hopefully we'll have that data in about a week or so and start testing moths this season so that we can get some in-season data besides waiting for that to get harvested middle of September. Thank you.